Yeah, grateful to Leland last week. Got to go hear N.T. Wright speak last week. He spoke 9 times in 3 days, which was pretty great. About an hour and a half each time. He really they called it a summer intensive, and it was intensive. It was extremely intensive for 3 days. But one cool thing is that I thought, man, when I'm in Waco, in the afternoon when it's over, I want to go see if I can find Chip and Joanna's place. I want to see Magnolia, that place they have in downtown Waco that they remade. Turns out it was 50 feet from where I was. It was right across the street. So every day at lunch and every afternoon, I walked over there and got to go to some food trucks and different things like that. And it's a really cool place. It made me think, man, we need one of these in the inner city. They had reclaimed just some old abandoned land and repurposed it into this beautiful park for families and people and to play and be together and eat together and had left all the old around it and about it, but you could also see the new. And it reminded me of new creation. It reminded me of, it's a picture of what we're about in this world. So anyway, that was good. I'm still kind of processing what I heard. I was driving from Waco to Dallas. I had to catch a plane in Dallas, and so I was driving from Waco to Dallas, and I was thinking, how do I explain this to people? And what I thought about was I felt like I had been reading Romans on a 1970s console TV, and someone took me into an IMAX theater with 4D. And I read Romans on an IMAX screen, and it was a really, really good study time together, and it really was intense. Got to meet new people, be around a lot of people who love the Lord very much, and that's encouraging always. It was a good time. So let's go to your handout. I've got 2 or 3 quotes here, and I think they're so important. Remember, we're at the place, and I'm really grateful again to Leland for teaching last week. I've come to the conclusion that there's a question missing from the worldview questions, and I think it's kind of the question that goes underneath all of them, or over all of them. Can't decide whether to put them over, under, wherever it is, around, everything. But I think all of our worldview, no matter what your worldview is, our worldviews will grow out of our view of God. Okay? And that view may be He doesn't exist, and therefore that shapes a worldview. There is no such thing as God. Okay, and so I think that grows a worldview. Okay. And so there's this spectrum. I had my notes last week, and I'm just kind of reviewing very quickly that there's a spectrum of there is no God. And I will tell you that the Christian God that we claim to worship is the other end of the spectrum. It's not a middle thing. The biblical claim about God is that He's 3 in 1, and that He became human and came to this earth. And that is unique to any worldview in the history of the world. No other worldview has said that God was crucified on a cross, on a Roman cross. And so that's the other extreme. We're not people of the middle, is what I'm saying. We're people who hold an extreme view. So therefore, when this first started being preached, we're seeing in the book of Acts right now, what was the reaction? Man, lots of riots going on. Acts is a book about riots a lot of the time. N.T. Wright said last week, this is the thing that kind of stuck in my mind, it's really funny. He said, whenever Paul preached, people rioted. He said, whenever I speak, they serve me biscuits and tea. And he said, there's the difference between me and Paul, I guess. But it was an extreme view. And then in between, there are lots of views. There's the Deist view. We've talked about that. Deists believe that there is a God, but He's so far away, He doesn't have anything to do with us. We're just down here. Maybe every once in a while He checks in with us, but, not much going on with God. And so there's all the way from there is no God to what we say and what we claim that the Bible says about God. And then the question becomes, is what we say about the Bible true? I mean, is it the truth of this universe? We have to know that and find out. Part of that's by faith, part of that's by search and using our minds and those things, but if it's either true or it's not true. If it's not true, Paul says we're to be pitied more than anybody in the world. If we're living out on this extreme and none of it's true, then yeah, that's a true statement. If we're just living here in the middle and it doesn't really matter, then take it or leave it. It doesn't matter if it's true or not true. I've told you before, I'm not the person that believes that, if none of it's true, the Christian life's still the best way to live. Not if it's lived the way the biblical spiritual worldview. It's not the best way to live if there is no resurrection, if there is no hope of glory, then it's not the best way to live. But let's go back. I'm not going to read this whole first. You're welcome to read this whole first quote. But basically, this guy says, Andy Crouch says in one of his writings about worldview, he says this. He says that, we can overanalyze worldview. We can sit around and think about worldview all the time. And then we can form worldview academies and classes and all these kinds of things, and that's all we do. And he said, but that doesn't change behavior. You don't change behavior by just having it all up here in your mind, okay? Doesn't change worldview, change culture, doesn't do anything. And in a sense, I agree with him. And also in a sense, I say, worldview can't just be up here. That's not what a worldview is. Worldview, I don't know your worldview. And it's not something you can explain to me. It's something I would have to watch. Because it's action. It's lived out. And so everybody has a worldview that they live from. And so I would disagree with him in a sense that, yeah, I understand what he's saying. We can overthink it all the time. But with worldview, it is something that has to be lived out. It is something that has to be. And so however we answer the questions of worldview in our daily lives, as we go about living our lives every day, where are we, who are we, what's the problem, what's the solution, what time is it? We've got a view of God there, okay? That's reflected there. And so I do agree with him when he says here, what we've got to do is act our way into thinking. We can't think our way into acting. We got to act our way into thinking, is a conclusion here. And then then the next quote simply says that change is hard. That okay, we've believed something all our lives, and then we're confronted with something that says it's different than that. Okay? It's very difficult for people in the church to change their minds about anything because this is the way it is. And the gospel is unchanging, right? And these are gospel truths, so nothing can ever be changed. And I would say, man, we got to change some of the ways we think. Because some of the ways we think, there's some reasons why. But remember, one of the whole premises of this, one of the passages we looked at, there is no condemnation for those in Jesus Christ. We live from that worldview. I don't go into something saying, oh, I can't admit I'm wrong because I might be condemned. No, there's no condemnation. I'm free to say I'm wrong. I was wrong about that. Because there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Okay? And a biblical spiritual worldview says that my life is played to an audience of one. If there's no condemnation from him for those in Christ Jesus, then it doesn't really matter if I'm condemned by other people. I don't live my life based on, well, they might condemn me and they might say something and they might, what will people think about that? That's not my worldview. My worldview is I'm only here to please one. And so change is hard. And so here, the reason I like this quote so much on the second quote is that describes all the things we do to resist changing the way we see the world and changing the way we act. We deny, we defend, we minimize, we rationalize away things that don't fit our worldview. Okay? And I will tell you that's a part of the church history, is to do those things, to deny, defend it, minimize it, rationalize it away. Anything so we don't have to change. Anything so we don't have to. And we're talking about the level here of change. The worldview is all about change. How do we handle change? You know, the whole story we're looking at in Acts on Sunday mornings is all about people who had their worldview shattered to pieces. Okay? They witnessed a Messiah being crucified, and their first reaction was very natural and very right, according to their worldview. Messiahs don't die on crosses. They don't. People who came to destroy evil, wicked people don't get killed by evil, wicked people that mean anything, you know? And they watched their whole worldview just get blasted into pieces. And they were forced to change. They were forced to change. They were forced 3 days later to stand in front of that crucified one and admit he was alive and say, okay, I had it all wrong. I can't deny that. I can't defend my old way. I can't minimalize it. I can't rationalize it away. I've got to deal with this new reality. God himself has come in the world, died on a cross, has been resurrected, and now a new world and a new worldview is necessary. And we're witnessing, you know, so what does that look like? We're witnessing in the book of Acts. Every Sunday in these lessons on the book of Acts, what it looks like when that happens. Okay? And why do we have that in our Bibles? Because we're the church, and we're confronted with the same thing. What are we going to do with this reality and this truth? Okay? I will tell you that what we're doing right now with these kids at Hope that we've worked with Hope Central for so long is growing out of a biblical spiritual worldview of new creation. It's what we have to do. There has to be some change in this. Somebody has to stand up and say, you know, we can't just let generation after generation continue to be destroyed and defeated by life. That's not what God came to do. And we're the church. So we have to step in. Is it going to be hard? Yeah. Is it going to cost us? Yeah. Is it going to be difficult? Yes, it is. Okay. Is it going to require some hot days, and is it going to require some things done in our building that might put a mess on the floor for 5 minutes and then we pick it up? Yes, it's going to. Absolutely. But that's what we're called to do, you know. And, you know, today, Patrick Ramsey's truck got repaired. And you know who did the repair? It's one of the coolest stories ever. A guy that I picked up in prison 5 years ago who's a mechanic. And I called him. He's had kids in our program the whole time, and he's an excellent mechanic. And he's been out at Patrick's house fixing the truck for the last 2 days in 108-degree heat index from 8 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. He said he drunk 2 crates of 48 water. Okay? And he FaceTimes me every couple of hours to let me know. And Patrick called me yesterday. Patrick Ramsey called me yesterday and said, this is the nicest guy I've ever met in my life. He's so considerate of me and my time and my property and everything, and he is doing an excellent job. And Patrick just wanted to convey that. You know, we're supposed to go out and include other people and include people, you know, that might not be included otherwise, you know. And so, yeah, that's what we're about in this mission of this church, And that's what Mark talked about in Mission a few weeks ago, and that's what we're executing. We had this dinner Saturday night for the families, and we told them about it, and it was awesome, and it went great. And we're going to have our families together a couple of times this weekend as we continue to get ready. And yeah, just a lot of cool things. And it all comes from, it's the church's reaction to the story and the truth of God. So it's an unconscious action that we do. Well, this is just what you do. You go out and as Jesus said, call people from the outer roads and call people from the outside and invite them into the feast and teach them how to get dressed, Jesus said. You know, remember the guy in the parable of Jesus that got called to the wedding, and he came in and the wedding master said, "You're not dressed right, get out." Okay? I don't know what all that parable's about, but it does tell me we go out to the highways and byways and we call people in and tell them to come in, and we get them ready to come into the wedding feast. We get them ready to do that. And so, yeah, this is not some theory that we're doing, but we need to know this. We need to be in the Word, is what I'm saying. But we also are acting it out. And so, yeah, the worldview is at the bottom of the first page. There's God is King, and an eternal quality of life can only happen growing from that source of life. And we're carrying out that mission in the church. So, who is God? We want to take a couple of weeks and look closely at God. Man, we could go so many places in Scripture, and we could do this for weeks and months about the nature of God. I've just picked one. It'll probably take us this week and 2 weeks from now, but we're going to go to the book of Exodus, okay? We're going to be in the Torah. I'm on the second page of the handout, on the back of the handout. And so we're going to go to the book of Exodus, and we're asking the question, who is God, as we read this story? And what's this story all about? And Torah, and Leland probably mentioned this last week, Torah is a great introduction to God. Torah, by the way, means guidance or instruction. Okay? Doesn't mean law. It's got laws in it. But the word Torah to the Jews is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Okay, that 5 books of Moses, the 5 books of Moses. And it provides a great introduction. And it's good to get introduced to just who is this God. And remember, the people that are reading this for the first time, remember we need to enter their world a little bit. Okay, because this is not written with a 21st century culture in mind at all. They are entering a world of many, many, many gods. You have many to choose from. Not only do nations have their own God, but families have their own God, tribes have their own God. You got gods to choose from. You know, if you were a Jew in that day and you went to somebody and they said, "Hey, who's your God?" "Our God is the God." "What? Well, which God?" You know? And so it's very important. It's very important from Genesis 1 for this story to say, this is the God of gods. Okay? Genesis doesn't say, by the way, "Oh, you guys are so stupid. There's only one God and nothing other exists." That's how we might go about saying it. You know? There's no such thing as gods. That's crazy. But the Bible comes from the viewpoint that there's a spiritual world in which there are gods who think they're pretty salty, who think they're pretty good. And then when they get compared up to the God, they become pitiful. That's the way that this story is told. They become kind of weak, you know. And these gods in the ancient world all have their own representatives in the world. Who are the representative gods in the world? Kings in ancient world. The king appoints a representative to come. The king is the ultimate representative of the god. It's kind of like a hierarchy. The god appoints a king, and the king is there, and he's appointed by the god, and then the king can appoint royal representatives. Okay? Think about the biblical story in that term. from the very beginning. That the Bible story goes into that culture on the very first page and says, no. We're all the royal representatives. Humanity is the royal representative of the king. The king. There's one king, and that story shapes everything that we read in the Torah. That story. Okay? Representatives are important, and there are many, many gods. So just who is your God? Okay? I know my God, and so lots of times if you say the word God to me, how am I going to think? If I have my own God and you tell me you have a God, what am I going to think about your God? He's probably a lot like my God, the one I think about all the time. Right? But there's a different God that's here, is my point. And we could spend a lot of places, but let's go to Exodus, and we're going to go. Now, why Exodus? I think this is an important point. The Exodus is going to become the event that runs through the rest of the Bible. Okay? Think about Jesus dies at what weekend? Passover. What does the Passover commemorate and celebrate? Kind of celebrates. Yeah, celebrates the Exodus. Okay? And the very act of Jesus dying, Jesus makes sure that it all revolves around what? The Passover, the Exodus. That's not an accident, okay? The way sometimes that we think about Jesus and his death, we might have told him and advised him, you need to make sure you die on the Day of Atonement. Okay? Because what happened on the Day of Atonement? All the sins of the people. Yeah, the sins were forgiven and taken away. So why not the Day of Atonement? Well, there's some very good reasons why this happened. Okay? On the Passover. And all of the things that Jesus did on the cross are being drawn out of the book of Exodus, are being pulled forward out of the book of Exodus. And what happened to Jesus? Let's go to the book of Revelation, and we'll stop a couple of places in between. But let's go all the way to the end. John says he went through this door in heaven, okay? And he looked inside the door and he saw the throne room of the universe, right? And he sees, there's not much of a description. There's a very little description. There's one seated on the throne who looked like a gem and had a rainbow around it. And there was 7 torches, which was the Holy Spirit. Okay? A little more tangible, right? A little bit more tangible. But then, what was on the throne? A lamb that had been slain. A lamb looking as if it had been slaughtered. Okay? Passover. Exodus. Okay? All the way through the Bible. Okay? I had never realized this. This is one of those things last week that I watched in IMAX in front of me in Romans. But think about, if you want to turn over there, that's fine. We'll talk about it just for a second, maybe in more detail later. But Romans 6, 7, and 8. Okay? Paul is writing this beautiful, deep, long exposition of his gospel, what he believes, to the Roman church. And we could probably talk about why was he doing that. But he's writing, it's not just a skim over. It's not just that, but he's going all the way from Genesis to Malachi, and he's writing this story of the truth about what God has done. So we come to Romans 6, and we know Romans 6 probably better than any other of the chapters, right? There's some texts in Romans 8 we know real well. But in Romans 6, it talks about those of us who have been baptized into Christ have been baptized into his death, right? And we've died to sin and we're no longer slaves to that, okay? That's the message of chapter 6. Where does that slavery stuff come from? It comes from the Exodus. We used to be under the power of someone else or something else, and now we've been set free. That's Exodus language. And what does he say in Romans 6? We've passed through the water. Did anybody in the Exodus story pass through some water and come out saved on the other side? Yeah. So in Romans 6, Paul is using this huge Exodus image to say we've come out of Egypt, so to speak, and we've come through the Red Sea, so to speak, and salvation is on the other side. And then Romans 7. Romans 7 is all about the law. The law. Okay? The Torah would be better translation in your Bible in Romans 7, except for a couple of places. It would be Torah, the Torah. And what happened next in the Exodus? They went to Sinai and they were given what? The law. God gave the 10 Commandments and gave the law. And so Paul talks about the law. Then, what happens after he gave the law? God comes down on the mountain. He calls Moses up. We're going to look at that here in a few minutes in detail. We're going to look at all this in detail. In chapter 8 of Romans, we now have the Spirit tabernacling in us. And what happens in the book of Exodus after they were given the law? Moses goes up and God says, you see all this? Moses, okay, we're going to make a model of this. I mean, literally in the book of Exodus, Moses is in heaven. The wording is there. And he goes up and God shows him everything and he goes, I'm going to show you a pattern of how to make a little model of this. We're going to make a tent, and it's going to look like everything you see up here. And Moses, okay, but the point is that God is coming down to dwell with his people. I'm coming down to dwell with you. I'm coming down to live with you, and I'm going to live with you in this tent, all right? And that's what Romans 8 is about. And so Paul, in telling the story of Christianity, telling the story of what happens to a Christian out of slavery, through the water, through the law now, to the tabernacling presence of God, what story does he use? He uses the Exodus story. He uses the whole outline of the Exodus story. Okay? And so this story is kind of important, You go through, I've got some Psalms listed on your handout here if you ever want to read them. For some reason, and I didn't know this till yesterday, but most of the Psalms that talk about the Exodus are in pairs. I didn't know they were grouped together in pairs. I don't know why. Haven't figured that out. But Psalm 77, 78, 80 and 81, 105 and 106, 135, 136, they're grouped together in doubles. And they talk about the Exodus. The Psalms, don't forget what God did for us. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget what happened. Okay? Your worldview questions can be answered by reading the Exodus story, Israel. Where are you? You're in a world in which God saved you and rescued you. You're in a dangerous world where powers can enslave you. You're in a world, hey, who are you? You're God's firstborn son, he says in Exodus. You're the one who, when you cried out, God said, I'm coming to rescue you. That's who you are. That's how important you are. What's the problem? You're in slavery to these powers that get their own definition of good and evil. They make up their own definition for whatever suits them. That's the problem. And what's the solution? The solution is rescue by the King. Okay? And so what time is it? It's time to be a light to the world and tell the world that story. That's the worldview of Exodus. That's the worldview of what's going on. And so Israel wrote that down into songs that they in their worship. And they sang it in worship. And they sang it, and they sang it, and they sang it, and they sang it. And then they went to festivals, and they reenacted it. And they did all those kinds of things. They lived in booths and tents, and they did all those things to remember and remind and to sing and to recite and to say and to all these kinds of things about their life, And that's kind of what all that is. So, that was simply to say, this is a good place to be if we want to see the whole story of the Bible, because this event is what's going to drive the whole rest of the Bible, the Exodus event. Any questions or comments or anything? And so let's go look exactly in Exodus and see what it says. Obviously, we're not going to go through all 40 chapters, verse by verse. That might take a minute or two. But I just want to pick out some things. Man, from the beginning, the Exodus story. I went back last 2 or 3 weeks as I was getting ready for this and just reread Exodus a few times. And wow. Just a lot of stuff there. A lot of stuff in here. Let's just look at the very beginning and see if it has any echoes or allusion. See if there's anything in the Bible that sounds familiar to this, okay? I'm just going to read the first paragraph. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each of his household. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Total number of people born to Jacob was 70. By the way, born to Jacob means Jacob and his children. Okay. And so 70 people originally went to Egypt, right? 70 people. Joseph was already in Egypt. Book of Exodus just gave us a nice little synopsis of Genesis 12 through 50, right? Okay. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers and that whole generation. But the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Anything in the Bible ever talked about be fruitful and multiply and fill the land and be prolific? Has anything up to this point in the Bible ever said that? Genesis chapter 1. Be fruitful and multiply. Okay? They're living their Israel mandate. They're living their human mandate. God is blessing this. Okay? They've had, in a sense, in Genesis, been forced to be rescued because the creation is not yielding what it's supposed to yield, and it's not doing because it's a fallen world and there's a famine in the world, and the man is striving and fighting with the land, and humanity is striving and fighting with the land and can't get enough food. So God is behind all that, and God is over all that and everything. But as these people come, as Abraham's family come, they're being blessed just like God said. Okay? Just like God told Abraham. Not only does it say it in Genesis 1, but he says to Abraham, look at the stars of the sky. I've made a promise to you that, man, if you can, count them. Just count them up. Your descendants will be more than this. There's going to be a blessing to your descendants. So right here in that one little sentence, you've got Genesis 1 being pulled in. You've got Genesis chapter 15 being pulled in. That all this is happening. All this is going on. That Abraham's family, Jacob's family is together, and they're in Egypt, and they're fulfilling their mandate. Okay? They're being, even before it's been said, light to the nations in a sense. But, there's a big but. What happens? Now a new king arose in Egypt who did not know Joseph. He looks at the people and sees this blessing and says, I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. I don't like what's going on. And so he, before this gets out of control, before this blessing and this promise gets out of control, he doesn't know anything about a promise, but before all this happens, he puts a fence around it and says, there's a new king in town. And he wasn't aware. The Hebrew here says he did not even know. And by that, which means he was ignoring the stories that were told. Okay? Because it would have been written down. Joseph was written down in Egypt's history, I guarantee you. It was written down. It was orally told to these pharaohs and these princes. the story of Egypt and the story of what happened and the story of how everything, there wasn't anything they didn't know about that was going on. And there wasn't anything they didn't know about. Well, that started 300 years ago. That started 200 years ago, and here's the story. They're supposed to know that. They know that. But who cares about that? There's a whole sermon probably in class in that, of just the mindset of taking over these people. And you can already sense the way that this is worded. You can already sense that it's the powers bumping up against and crashing into the promise of God to the human race and the promise of God to Abraham's family. Here come the powers that try to riot against God. And it's going to culminate over in chapter 5. Okay? And I know I'm skipping a lot, okay? I really understand. There's so much we could do. But I just want to pull several points out of here. Look at chapter 5, verse 1. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go so that we may celebrate a festival to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should heed him?" He says, "Thank you. Hand me another bowl of fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I make my own rules." And I've made my own rules for so long, I don't even know who you're talking about. I don't have any idea. Who in the world is your God that I should heed him? Okay. Now, we understand and know he's about to get a really good, intensive lesson on who is God. He's about to get a good one. But he says, who is the Lord that I should heed him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Why wouldn't he let Israel go? I don't know their God. I know my God, and I know that I'm his representative in the world, and I know that I can do whatever I want to do. That's what I know. And it's a key moment in the story. It's when it's Adam and Eve eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We'll do our own thank you. Now it's on a national scale. Now it's big and huge, and we see the devastation that happens. Okay? But all through this story, the part that we're not looking at, remember what's going on. God is calling a representative from amongst humans. Okay? His representative, his royal representative, Moses, he's calling him to do his task to confront this evil that's there. Okay? We see that this power, this evil power, is seeking its own knowledge. So, before that happens, we have the burning bush. Let's go back to chapter 3. We have this little story of the burning bush because that's an important part of our story. In chapter 3, verse 2, right before this happens, before Moses goes to Egypt and before Moses stands before Pharaoh and Pharaoh says to him, "I do not know the Lord," Moses knows the Lord. And in chapter 3, we read the story of the burning bush. Okay? Verse 2, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, and yet it was not consumed. Okay? First time we're going to run into this, and we're going to see it all through the Bible. That whenever God's presence comes, especially in Exodus, what do we see when it's fire. Okay? It's fire. It's almost the way that I think of it, and this is not anything that I can prove in Scripture or anything like that, but in my mind, we have to remember heaven and earth are close, and it's divided not by distance and not by up there and down here, but it's divided almost by a veil or a curtain. And it's like when heaven enters the world, it's such a powerful thing that what happens? It lights on fire, you know? It's such a powerful connection. It's such an overwhelming presence in the world that something physical happens. Okay? We find that throughout the Bible. All right? The darkness on the cross is one of those moments that I think that heaven and earth might have pulled apart just a little bit. And it affected the whole world. It affected creation. I mean, Paul tells us in Romans 8 that creation is so connected to this, so connected to the Spirit of God and the presence of God and all this, that all of creation is affected by it. And creation is what? Groaning, hurting. And so God enters, and what Moses can see standing here on the earth is fire. But it's not a consuming fire. It's not destroying the world and destroying all the bushes and destroying everything. It's present. It's withholding its power to be present and in conversation and relational and those things. And so he tells Moses, take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. And I've thought about why take off your shoes. And God has already declared the ground around this bush holy. It's already been declared holy. Okay? Which means that Moses is walking, think about this, Moses is walking from outside the holy zone. He's walking from outside of it. And he's got dirt on his feet from what? On the bottom of his sandals from what? The unholy ground. Okay? You do not bring the unholy into the holy presence of the Lord. It's almost, I mean, we're gonna see this in Leviticus later on. We just get a glimpse of it here. That you do not bring the unholy into the holy. You do not bring that as what is holy. So take off your shoes and stand confidently with your bare feet on holy ground. Stand clean in the presence of the Lord, having put off that which is unholy and that which may tarnish and that which may taint and that which may pollute and those things. I don't think it was the shoes itself, it's the bottom of the shoes kind of thing, maybe. I don't know. What do y'all think? Just thoughts, questions, comments, anything? Yeah. Do you know why? Do you know the reasoning? Yeah. 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 I think it does. Mark just made mention of the Muslims take off their shoes and those kinds of things, and other people do too. And this is coming from the Lord's instruction, And he tells Moses, the ground that you're standing is holy. And like we said, we and Moses probably are going to understand what that word means a lot better in Leviticus, as God reveals more and shares more about, okay, how do we live? How do we live with me in the neighborhood? Me in heaven coming down to live in an earthly neighborhood. How do we do that? Leviticus is going to answer that question.
Priestly washings.
Yeah. That's going to be all a part of that, I think. The priests had to wash. The priests had to clean. Yeah. And so when we get to Leviticus, God is going to give specific instructions right here on how to enter this thing and how to enter it. And it's interesting here, we're also, we've learned a little bit about Moses up to this point. He had a pretty rough childhood, first few months, floating down a river on a basket. They were out to murder him like every other child, and he ended up, boom, in the house of Pharaoh. Had probably all the money he wanted, all the cars and everything, best clothes and everything, best education in the whole world, had everything. And then tried to go out and make a difference, made a mess of it, and ran away. and probably did what a lot of people do when they are confronted with it. Man, I tried to make a difference in this world, and look what happened. He tried to be a leader on his own terms of the Israelites, but then all of a sudden one day, as he's in his new job, in his new vocation, and God shows up and says, "You in fact are the one." And I read a sentence in Exodus that I had never read, I'd never noticed before. And right now, I'm not going to try to find it because it's somewhere in the story of Moses and Pharaoh and Aaron having this back and forth. And I didn't write down the chapter and verse, I should have. But it says in there, all the Egyptian officials and all the princes of Egypt they knew Moses. They had a high esteem of Moses. This guy wasn't walking into somewhere he'd never been before. He was walking back into the place where he grew up. He was walking back. And the Egyptians knew him. They knew who he was. And a lot of them had a lot of respect for this guy, it says in Exodus. But Pharaoh didn't. Pharaoh didn't seem to have any respect for anybody. The past, the present, the future. God kept telling him, your future is going to be a lot different. Well, no, it's not, because I'm Pharaoh, And Pharaoh is a great study here to look at the arrogance of sin in the world, and the powers that rule the world. But we're going to see this fire coming back. We went around a little bit, but this fire, this presence, we're going to see that come up again in Exodus 19. We're going to see that come up in Exodus 24. When the presence of God leads the Israelites, it's fire by night. And when the glory of the Lord finally rests in the tabernacle, what is it? It's a pillar of fire. Okay? This manifestation of the presence of God. The glory, it's called the Shekinah, the glory of God. The Shekinah, I think, is how Hebrews pronounce Shekinah. Isn't that right, Mark? Shekinah. Okay. The presence of the Lord, the glory of the Lord. So let's skip over. We know the story, and we could stop a lot of places. Moses and Pharaoh have this back and forth big time. 10 plagues, all of this. Finally, the firstborn is killed. Okay? And remember, in Exodus 5, God says to Moses, one of the first things he says to Moses standing there without his shoes on and on holy ground, is having a conversation with the Lord. And one of the things God says, Israel is my firstborn son. Israel is my child. That's why we're going to get him. I'm not going to leave my child. And he relates himself. God gives a picture of himself there that we can relate to, right? How many people in here have a child who, if they needed rescue, would go rescue them? I think probably everybody. You probably have rescued them before in the past. Maybe at the cost of time and energy and stress and health and money and whatever, right? God reveals himself. Who is this God? He's like us parents who just can't leave his child. He can't. That's who he is. That's who he is. If you want to know who this God is. He has a fatherly affection, parental affection for these people. Not only has he made a promise, and he keeps his promises, and that's an important part of the Bible, and we need to know God keeps his promise, but he also just loves like daddy loves his kids, and mama loves the kids. That's who God is. That's what he's all about. Okay. So they leave Egypt, they go through the Red Sea, and I want us to stop in Exodus 15 real quick. Man, I'd love to take about 2 minutes and get where I was going to get tonight, then we can finish it in 2 weeks. But Moses sings a song. Man, Moses breaks out in worship after the Red Sea crashes over the Egyptians. Moses, man, just worship comes out. And how does it end? Exodus 15, verse 18. The Lord will reign forever and ever. Who is king? Pharaoh? No. Pharaoh's not king. Who had the last word? The king had the last word. Ask Pharaoh right now, who is the Lord? Who's the Lord? He's the king. He is the king who reigns forever and ever. All right. Now, this is what I want to end tonight. We're not going to get quite as far as I wanted to get, but I do want to finish this point of the king. Hold on to that, because who is king right now? God is king. And let's go over to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 8. I'm going to start in verse 4. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations." But that thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." Hey, who are they usurping off the throne? The king who reigns forever and ever. Back, God's reigned from Exodus 15 till now in the Israelites' mind. But we want our own king. We want our own king. Now, something else, just one point to make about the kings, what the kings did. Man, we could spend all night talking about what the kings did. But go back to Exodus, and we'll look at this a little more. This is something that I ran across that I think is so important. But go over to the golden calf story, Exodus 32. Let me show you a sentence in this story. And then we'll go to a sentence a little bit later on about one of the kings of Israel, one of these guys that the king that they wanted, you know. But Exodus 32, verse 3. They went to Aaron. Man, we need a God. Moses has been up on the mountain, looks hopeless, terrible, awful. We need somebody in charge. And Aaron has a brilliant idea. Give me all your gold, silver, and all that stuff. Brought them to Aaron. He took the gold, verse 4, formed it into a mold, cast an image of a calf. By the way, that would have been something they had seen before in Egypt. Okay. So, good. Isn't it nice to have the comforts of home, you know? And you just, when you get stressed, you just need a little touch of home, right? That makes everything better. Okay? So he formed it into a calf. "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Aaron proclaims, "These are your gods." Okay? Turn over to 1 Kings 12, and that's where we'll end tonight. 1 Kings 12. By the time we get to 1 Kings 12, Saul, David, Solomon's son, people went to Solomon's son Rehoboam and said, "Please, your father taxed us to death. Could you ease up just a little bit?" And what is Rehoboam's answer? No. In fact, I'm going to give you more. What did Pharaoh do back in Egypt as soon as Moses came and said, "Let him go"? Make their work harder. Give them more. Okay? Give them more, give them more, give them more. So the people rebelled. Jeroboam took some people and he said, "Man, we're not around Jerusalem. We need a God. We need to build our own God," right? Look at this sentence in chapter 12 and verse 30. "So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold." Not 1 calf of gold, 2 calves of gold. He said to the people, "You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Here are your gods, O Israel." Same exact words as Aaron. And Israel is doomed from this point. They've learned nothing. They're divided. They've doubled their allegiance to idols. And now their royal representative, instead of being the God, the King of the universe, is some royal representative who gets his knowledge of good and evil from somewhere, and he says, here are your gods. Here they are. Okay. Man, these people need Jesus bad. They need Jesus. Okay. That's what Jackie, my friend Jackie, who comes to church here, she'll say to me sometimes, she'll whisper over to me, she said, man, those kids need Jesus bad. Yeah, these people need Jesus. And that's the whole point of the biblical story. These people need Jesus. We need Jesus. So I'm going to stop there tonight. We're going to go back and look at some more things in the Israel story. Okay, at the depths of sin and the response of this God. The response of this God and what he keeps doing in this world. So we're going to stop there. Everybody have a great night. Good to see y'all at home.